Gandalf the Grey, the wandering wizard, the guide of hobbits, the flame of Anor. He is the character most people think of when they imagine wisdom in Middle-earth. A being of patience, humor, and quiet power, who never sought the crown or the throne, but who nonetheless shaped the destiny of the world. And yet, there is one question that has haunted readers for decades. What if Gandalf had taken the One Ring? It is almost unthinkable, for throughout The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf refuses even to touch it. When Frodo offers him the ring in Bag End, Gandalf trembles and his voice grows terrible. With that power, I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly. He knows the danger. He knows that the ring does not simply corrupt the weak or the foolish. It twists even the greatest into tyrants. But imagine, just for a moment, that Gandalf gave in. Imagine that in a moment of desperation, temptation, or misguided hope, he took the ring from Frodo and claimed it for himself. What would happen next? Would Gandalf destroy Sauron and free Middle-earth from darkness forever? Or would he become something far worse than the Dark Lord himself? This is the tale of what might have been. A tale of light corrupted, of wisdom consumed, and of power so absolute that no one could hope to resist it. And to understand why this alternate history is so terrifying, we must begin by looking at who Gandalf truly is, and why the ring feared him more than anyone else. Before we can imagine Gandalf with the ring, we must understand Gandalf without it. Gandalf was not born in Middle-earth. His true name was Olorin, and he was one of the Maiar, immortal spirits created before the shaping of the world itself. In other words, he was of the same order as Sauron. Both Gandalf and the Dark Lord were Maiar, akin to lesser gods, servants of the Valar, who shaped Arda in the beginning. From the very start, Gandalf's essence was tied to wisdom, compassion, and subtle influence. In Valinor, the Undying Lands, he learned pity from the Lady Nienna, the Weeper of the World, and patience from Manwë, Lord of the Winds. Unlike many of his kind, Gandalf's power was never meant to dominate through force, but to guide through understanding. And yet, even bound in the body of an old man, stripped of much of his innate might by the command of the Valar, Gandalf's power in Middle-earth was extraordinary. This was the wizard who could stand alone against a Balrog of Morgoth, another Maya spirit, and cast it down after 10 days of battle. This was the wizard whose mere voice could break Saruman's staff and shatter his authority in Isengard. This was the wizard whose words stirred kings to ride to war, whose presence gave courage to the smallest hobbits, and whose fire and wrath terrified even the Nazgûl. Now imagine that power, already formidable, combined with the One Ring. The ring does not create strength out of nothing. It amplifies what is already there, feeding on ambition, magnifying natural gifts until they become monstrous. In a mortal, it grants unnatural life. In an elf, it sharpens beauty into something unbearable. In Sauron, it became a vessel of domination. In Gandalf, it would mean something far worse. For Gandalf's strength lies not just in fire or swordplay, but in influence. He commands hearts. He sways nations. With the ring upon his hand, Gandalf could bend the will of others effortlessly, making entire kingdoms follow him not out of fear, but out of devotion. He would not need orc armies or dark sorcery. He would wield loyalty itself as his weapon. This is why he refused it. Because with the ring, Gandalf would no longer be a guide or protector. He would become a ruler, a tyrant cloaked in white, burning with the fire of righteousness. A dark lord in the guise of a savior. And the most dangerous tyrant of all is the one who truly believes he is doing good. So what would it mean if Gandalf truly accepted the ring? The first and most obvious change is that the balance of power in Middle-earth would shatter instantly. Gandalf was already the greatest of the Astari, the wizard who could rally the free peoples even without the ring. With it, he would become unstoppable. The moment he placed the ring upon his finger, its power would surge into him like a flood. Unlike Frodo or Bilbo, Gandalf's spirit was vast enough to contain that storm, at least at first. Where it would corrupt a hobbit slowly, whispering in dreams and tempting with visions, Gandalf would harness it immediately. The skies would darken, the ground might tremble, and his enemies would feel a weight pressing upon their souls. And he would not hide in secrecy, as Sauron once did. No, Gandalf's nature is to stand openly, to confront evil in the light. With the ring, his light would blaze like a second sun, burning away shadows and casting his enemies into despair. Orcs would fall to their knees at his command, not from fear alone, but because their wills would no longer be their own. Sauron himself would sense it at once. The Dark Lord's spirit was tied to the ring, and he would feel Gandalf seize it. Rage would consume him, but there would also be fear. Because of all beings in Middle-earth, Gandalf was the one Sauron dreaded most. Not Aragorn, not Galadriel, not Elrond. Gandalf. In the short term, Gandalf with the ring might even win. Imagine him marching to Mordor, flames in his staff, armies rallying to his side not out of obligation, but out of devotion. Imagine the Nazgul fleeing from his presence, the eye of Sauron wavering under the combined assault of ring and Maia's spirit. Yes, Gandalf could overthrow Sauron. He could take Barad-dûr for himself. The ring would finally return to a master powerful enough to bend it fully to his will. But here lies the true horror. Gandalf would not destroy the ring. He would use it. And in doing so, he would become what he had always feared, not a servant of Sauron, but his replacement. At first he might tell himself it was for the good of all, to safeguard Middle-earth, to end war, to heal the wounds of centuries, and people would believe him, because Gandalf is not a monster in appearance. He would not rule through fear alone. He would rule through love, through trust, through the terrible, unshakable belief that he alone knew what was best. And that kind of power, the kind people give freely, is far harder to resist than the lash of any tyrant. If Gandalf wielded the ring, Middle-earth would not fall into darkness, at least not at first. Instead, it would blaze with light. Armies would rally to him willingly. Kings would bow not because of chains, but because they truly believed Gandalf was the savior they had awaited. Gondor would crown him as their protector. Rohan would march at his command. Even distant lands of Harad and Rhûn, weary of endless wars, might kneel to his banner, convinced that he brought peace. But that peace would not be freedom. It would be submission, hidden beneath the comforting illusion of hope. The danger of Gandalf with the ring is not the cruelty of orcs or the fire of Mordor. It is that he would appear righteous. Every act of conquest would be called justice. Every act of domination would be excused as necessary for the good of all. And no one would resist him, not at first. Hobbits would follow him, because he had once protected them. Elves might accept him as the one who finally united the world. Even dwarves, so stubborn in their independence, would find themselves swayed by his words. This is the nature of the ring. It does not simply corrupt with greed or hatred. It corrupts by turning virtues into weapons. Gandalf's compassion would twist into control. His wisdom would become manipulation. His fire, once a beacon of hope, would blaze so fiercely that no one could stand in its light. He would call it the Age of Renewal, the end of war, the end of Sauron, the end of strife. And yet, beneath that shining vision would be a single truth: all wills bent to one will. And when at last no one dared oppose him, Gandalf the Grey would be no more. In his place would stand the Bright Tyrant, a figure of terrible majesty, a lord more absolute than Sauron ever was. Because Sauron ruled through fear, Gandalf, with the ring, would rule through love. And that is the kind of rule no one can escape. The moment Gandalf took the ring, the Fellowship of the Ring would shatter. For Frodo, the ring-bearer, his entire mission would be undone in an instant. The task to carry the ring to Mordor was built on secrecy and sacrifice. But once Gandalf claimed it, secrecy would vanish, and sacrifice would no longer matter. Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin would look upon their friend and guide and see someone they barely recognized, a wizard cloaked in power too great to resist. Aragorn would stand against him. That much is certain. As the heir of Isildur, Aragorn knew better than anyone the danger of men claiming power they could not control. He might draw his sword, Andúril, against Gandalf, but what is a blade, however noble, against the will of a Maiar bearing the One Ring? Aragorn could resist for a time, but in the end he would either bend to Gandalf's command or fall trying to oppose him. Boromir, on the other hand, would welcome it. He already desired the ring for Gondor. To see Gandalf take it and wield it against Sauron would seem like his dream fulfilled. He might become Gandalf's most loyal captain, blinded by the hope that now Gondor could be saved. Legolas and Gimli would hesitate. Elves fear the ring, and Legolas would know the danger. Yet even his sharp eyes could not pierce the subtle persuasion Gandalf might weave. And Gimli, pragmatic and stubborn, might argue that if the wizard can finally defeat Sauron, then perhaps this was the best path. But whether they accepted or resisted, the Fellowship would never be the same. Their bond, built on trust and humility, would dissolve in the shadow of Gandalf's power. They would no longer be companions bound together in equal purpose. They would become followers or rebels, nothing in between. The greatest tragedy is that Gandalf himself would believe he was saving them. He would not thunder with cruelty like Sauron. He would speak gently, persuasively, assuring them that their fears were unfounded, that he bore the burden so they would not have to, that only he had the strength to carry the weight of destiny. But that is how tyrannies begin. Not with screams, but with promises. And thus the Fellowship would break. If Gandalf bore the One Ring, his first act would be inevitable: to march against Sauron. The Dark Lord would not wait long. He would feel the ring torn from his grasp, a wound to his very spirit, and his fury would shake Mordor to its foundations. His armies would rise sooner. His Nazgûl would ride immediately, and every orc in Middle-earth would be unleashed. But even Sauron would hesitate, because he would know who now carried the ring. When the ring was offered to Frodo, Gandalf recoiled because he knew its danger. But with the ring in his hand, that danger would become a weapon. He would wield fire and shadow on a scale Middle-earth had never seen. The Nazgûl, who once fled before his light at Weathertop, would now scatter like leaves in the wind. Orcs would collapse, their wills broken. Entire armies might lay down their arms before him, and yet Sauron was no fool. The ring was his creation. It was bound to him in ways even Gandalf could not escape. If Gandalf struck too soon, Sauron might wrest the ring's will back, corrupting Gandalf from within. If he struck too late, Sauron's armies might crush all resistance before Gandalf could rally enough strength. The war would not be a noble campaign of men, elves, and dwarves against Mordor. It would be a cataclysm between two godlike beings, the Maiar who fell into darkness, and the Maiar who believed himself a savior. Barad-dûr and Minas Tirith would tremble. The skies over Mordor would blaze with unnatural storms, light and fire colliding with shadow and flame. Could Gandalf overthrow Sauron? Yes. With the ring amplifying his essence, he might cast the Dark Lord down and scatter his armies. The eye could falter. The tower of Barad-dûr might fall. But Gandalf would not destroy the ring afterward. And that is the fatal difference. Sauron would fall, but not evil. Evil would simply change its face. And those who followed Gandalf would call it victory, never realizing they had traded one master for another. Middle-earth would be free of Sauron, but it would not be free. With Sauron cast down and Mordor broken, Middle-earth would awaken to a new dawn. But it would not be the dawn of men, nor the return of the rightful king. It would be the beginning of the Age of Gandalf. At first, this age would seem golden. The orcs would scatter into the shadows, their masters destroyed. The Nazgûl, bound to the will of the ring, would vanish into nothingness. The great kingdoms of men would rally around the wizard who had defeated the enemy when none else could. Songs would be sung in his honor, temples raised in his name. The free peoples would believe themselves liberated. But slowly, the truth would emerge. Gandalf would not return the crown of Gondor to Aragorn, nor leave the Shire to its hobbits. He would keep the ring, and with it, the right to decide all matters. He would decree what alliances must stand, what wars must be fought, what borders must be drawn, and though he would speak gently and with wisdom, there would be no choice but to obey. For who could resist him? Every word from his mouth would carry the weight of the ring. Even without raising a weapon, he could bend the strongest hearts. Kings and lords would find themselves agreeing with him against their will. The proud would bow, the stubborn would yield. Middle-earth would become united, yes, but united under a single mind. Gondor, Rohan, Dale, and even the Shire would no longer be free realms. They would be provinces of one dominion, Gandalf's. And unlike Sauron, Gandalf would not need to burn and enslave. His tyranny would be cloaked in benevolence. He would heal the land, rebuild the cities, end hunger, spread learning and culture. But all of it would be on his terms, for his vision, a vision no one else could alter, no council could question, no people could refuse. This is the true horror of Gandalf with the ring. A Middle-earth at peace, but a peace where no choice remained. A world without rebellion, without freedom, without hope of change. And the longer he held the ring, the less of Gandalf would remain. The wizard who once laughed with hobbits and walked humbly as a grey pilgrim would vanish, leaving only the Bright Tyrant, cloaked in white flame, convinced he alone could guide the fate of the world forever. And that's how the Age of Gandalf would dawn. Brilliant, terrible, and eternal. All tyrannies end, even those cloaked in light. The question is not if, but when. If Gandalf took the ring, his reign might last centuries, for though he bore the form of an old man, his true nature as a Maiar meant he could endure as long as the will of the ring sustained him. Unlike mortal kings, he would not fade with age. He would become eternal, a figure of flame and white majesty, unyielding as stone. At first, his rule would be called a golden age. Trade would flourish, orcs would vanish, and no nation would dare rise against him. But slowly, the cracks would spread. For when one will dominates all, there can be no growth, no change, no freedom. The free peoples would wither in the comfort of safety. Cultures would stagnate, traditions lost, individuality crushed, and Gandalf himself would change. The laughter of the Grey Pilgrim, the kindness of Mithrandir, the friend of hobbits and companion of wanderers, all of it would be gone. What remained would be only fire, purpose, and the cold, unshakable conviction that he was right. He would no longer be Gandalf. He would be something else, something nameless. Would anyone rise against him? Perhaps. Aragorn, if he lived, might become the seed of rebellion. Perhaps Galadriel, though she too feared the ring's temptation. Perhaps the children of men, generations later, would grow weary of living under an immortal lord. But resisting Gandalf with the ring would be like resisting the sun itself. His light would burn away all opposition before it could take root. And so the true tragedy of this tale is not that Gandalf would fail. It is that he would succeed. He would save Middle-earth from Sauron. Yes, but he would do so at the cost of everything that made Middle-earth worth saving. This is why Tolkien feared such a possibility. In a letter, he wrote that Gandalf, as Ring Lord, would be far worse than Sauron. Because Sauron's evil was obvious, a shadow that could be fought. Gandalf's evil would wear the mask of wisdom and benevolence, a tyranny so complete that no one would even think to resist it. In the end, Middle-earth under Gandalf's ring would not fall into shadow. It would drown in light. And so we come to the end of this what if. If Gandalf had taken the ring, Middle-earth might have been freed from Sauron, but only to kneel under a ruler far more absolute. Not the cruel shadow of Mordor, but the brilliant fire of a bright tyrant whose love and wisdom would twist into domination. This is why Gandalf refused it. When Frodo offered him the ring, Gandalf trembled, not because he feared Frodo, but because he feared himself. He knew that of all the peoples of Middle-earth, he might be the most dangerous ring-bearer of all. Not because he sought glory, but because he sought good. And that is the ring's greatest weapon, to take noble intentions and turn them into chains. Tolkien understood this deeply. He lived through a century marked by tyrants who promised peace, prosperity, and unity, only to bring ruin in their wake. His story is not merely about monsters in the dark, but about how even the wisest and kindest can become monsters if they claim too much power. The One Ring is the embodiment of absolute control, and absolute control can never be wielded for good. Not by Sauron, not by Saruman, not even by Gandalf. That is why the ring had to be destroyed. Why no great lord or wizard could be trusted with it. Why only a small, humble hobbit could carry it to the fire. In the end, this what if reminds us of the heart of Tolkien's world, that true strength lies not in domination, but in humility, not in bending others to your will, but in choosing mercy, friendship, and hope. Gandalf knew that, and that is why he remained Gandalf the Grey, the guide, the wanderer, the friend of hobbits, rather than becoming a tyrant in white flame. And perhaps that is the lesson we take away. That destiny is not about seizing power, but about refusing it. If you make it this far and you liked it, subscribe our channel for more stories and mysteries that Lord of the Rings offer.